Let's get started. Welcome to today's webinar, CBD for Seniors, What Does the Research Say? I'm your host, Janet Barker-Evans. Did you know that according to a 2019 Gallup poll, almost 20% of people over 50 have tried cannabidiol? It's otherwise known as CBD, which is an active ingredient in medical marijuana that does not cause a high. It's most often used for pain, anxiety, insomnia, or stress. We're going to be talking to a leading MD studying CBD to find out what the latest research says about its capabilities, its side effects, and more. So today you may be joining us on Zoom, but we're also simulcasting with Facebook Live. So before we introduce you to our speaker, let's take a minute to talk about how you can interact with us during the webinar. Now, things are a little bit different from computer to computer, but if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you're seeing this webinar, you'll see some icons. The one on the far left is usually a microphone. Now we've muted you so there's no background sound, but let me explain how you can ask questions or ask for technical help. As far as the other buttons go, the most important are the ones that say Q&A and the one that says chat. When you click the Q&A button, a window will appear where you can type any questions you have for our Q&A session at the end. Feel free to start asking questions during the presentation, and then we're going to get to as many questions as we can at the end. Now, the chat button opens up a little window where you can chat with our presenters and our moderator. If you're having any technical difficulties, let us know with the chat. Our moderator will help you if they can. And if you're on Facebook, even easier. Just type your questions in the comment box and our moderator will see them. After the webinar today, you'll all get a follow-up email with all of this information, as well as a recording of the webinar, so you can refer to it later or share it with your friends and loved ones. Ready to go? All right, let's jump in. Let's meet Dr. Jeffrey Chen. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Janet. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you here. So Dr. Chen is an MD with an MBA. He's an impact entrepreneur, a scientist, and a storyteller. He's the co-founder and CEO of Radical Science, the founder and former executive director of the UCLA Cannabis Research Initiative, and one of the first in the world to conduct cannabinoid-related research, education, and policy projects. Jeff has broad experience as co-founder, managing partner, investor, board member, and advisor to companies, nonprofits, not-for-profits, and venture firms in life science, sustainability, tech, and media. Dr. Chen has been featured in Rolling Stone, Wall Street Journal, CNN, Time, NPR, and Entrepreneur. He's also a David Geffen Fellow, a U.S. patent holder, and industry mentor for the U.S. National Institute of Health Innovation CORE. Jeff earned his MD and MBA concurrently at UCLA and a full merit scholarship following a BS at Cornell. Wow. So Jeff, there are so many questions on what CBD is, how it differs from cannabis, what the health benefits are, risks, regulations, and all of that. So let's get into it. What's the difference between CBD and cannabis?
Yeah, that's going to be, today we're going to disentangle this really confusing subject. So I'll help you guys kind of think through all the things that you've probably been hearing from your friends in the media. I'll focus on the health benefits of CBD. I'll show you how it's distinct from THC, which you might have heard about. I'll also tell you why there's such big differences between the risks of THC versus that of CBD. I'll give you some tips on regulations at the state and federal level that you might apply to you. And lastly, we'll end with some practical tips as you're going about trying to understand what to do with CBD.
That's great.
All right, let's start. There we go. So the first thing that you'll want to know is that when you hear the word cannabis, what you're really hearing is it's a species of plant. And this species of plant, cannabis, depending on what part of the plant you're using, you're going to be talking about different things. So when it comes to the stalk of the cannabis plant, that's actually used for its fiber purposes. You guys might have heard hemp, so rope, textiles, paper, building materials. So that's the stalk of the cannabis plant. It doesn't have any medicinal value, it doesn't have any recreational value. It's the flower of the cannabis plant that holds THC, which I'll talk about in a second, but also things like CBD. So that's abundant in the flower of the cannabis plant. And when the flower gets pollinated, you form cannabis seed, which is hemp seed, which you can buy at every major grocery store in the country. It's actually a very nutritious source of protein, omegas, and fiber. It's a superfood. So again, when you're talking about the cannabis plant, you want to ask yourself, what product from the cannabis plant am I talking about? But for the purposes of today, we'll focus on the stuff in the flower, the THC, or really focus on the CBD. Mm. All right. So in terms of humanity's usage of cannabis for its medicinal properties, that goes back several thousand years ago. And it was this gentleman, Emperor Shennong of China, who first wrote about the medical uses of cannabis. And there's a really interesting historical story where the emperor was asked, Emperor, how did you discover what cannabis can do? And to that, the emperor replied, well, I smoked it, but I did not inhale it.
It sounds familiar.
Not actually a true story, but possible that happened. All right, so after it was discovered by the Chinese, or first written about by the Chinese thousands of years ago, you see documented usage of cannabis as a medicine from the ancient Egyptians to the Europeans, all the way to North America, where about 150 years ago, cannabis starts to pop up in listings of medicines used throughout the US. It was completely legal 150 years ago. Now, you might be wondering, how is it that cannabis impacts our bodies? Well, we didn't even know this until about 25 years ago. We discovered something in the body called the endocannabinoid system. And if you look at the diagram on the right, all those little dots refer to places throughout the body that the endocannabinoid receptors have been identified. And you'll notice it's kind of everywhere. It's in your organs, it's in your brain, your spinal cord, your skin. And we named it after cannabis because we knew about cannabis first. We knew that cannabis produced cannabinoids, and we found endocannabinoids in our bodies that look very similar to the cannabinoids in cannabis. And what we realized was when we use cannabis, our bodies are reacting as if they were our own endocannabinoids. So the cannabis plant's mimicking our body's own endocannabinoids. So you might be wondering, well, what the heck does the endocannabinoid system do? Well, it does a lot of things. So first off, it regulates mood, things like anxiety and depression. It regulates memory formation, regulates sleep, regulates appetite, pain response, immune function, energy metabolism, and even reproduction. And if some of you are familiar with some of the popularly discussed effects of cannabis, this comes as no surprise, right? People talk about cannabis stimulating their appetite, or making them sleepy, or maybe helping with their pain. And so this is the main mechanism we believe that cannabis is able to impact humans. Now, not all cannabis is created equal. There's two very different components.
This is the big question. What is the difference between these two, the THC and the CBD?
Exactly, Janet. Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. And there couldn't be a bigger difference. They're two completely different animals. Same plant, two different animals. So THC is responsible for the euphoria, the high, the intoxicating, the recreational effects of cannabis. CBD is non-intoxicating whatsoever. There is no high associated with that. THC is also responsible for the addictive properties of cannabis, which I'll talk more about later in my talk. CBD has no such addictive properties or dependency forming habit effects. THC can also cause motor impairment. That's why we're concerned about stone driving. CBD does no such thing to motor impairment. And lastly, THC can stimulate hunger, which popularly called the munchies. And CBD does no such thing. So again, same plant, two very different compounds. In some ways they overlap. I'll talk more about that later, but for now, just realize that these are two really, really different things. And today we're really going to be focused on CBD. Now, another thing to realize is that cannabis has been changing. So if you look, this is a chart of the ratio of THC to CBD in cannabis that's been found throughout the US. And what you find is that the amount of THC has been spiking and the amount of CBD has been dropping. And what's been happening is the illicit market has been breeding cannabis to have more and more THC because people were purchasing it for potency and recreational effect. And what they didn't realize was the same precursor in cannabis can be turned into THC or CBD. So if you select for the THC pathway, you kind of have to crash the CBD content.
Oh.
So that
So
means that
is this specifically to focus on getting that bigger high?
that's exactly it. The illicit market knew that if they had cannabis with more THC content, they could sell it for more. And at the time, they didn't even know what CBD was. They just knew that if this plant had a lot of THC, I'll breed it with this plant that has a lot of THC and so forth. And over time, it just gets more and more concentrated and we're dropping the CBD content. So now the question is, the cannabis that the Chinese talked about using thousands of years ago, was it really 100-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD like it is today? Or maybe it was 1-to-1. Maybe it had more CBD than THC. So that's where the story gets a lot more complicated because of the illegality and the illicit market, what they've done to cannabis in America over the last half century. There we go. All right, now there's other things in cannabis too. So THC, CBD, these are things called cannabinoids. They're only found in the natural world in cannabis. There's many other cannabinoids too, but we don't really know what they do. And they're not present in very high amounts. Now, there's this whole other category of compounds in cannabis called terpenes. These, unlike cannabinoids, are found in all plants. There's thousands of different terpenes. But in cannabis just tends to produce a wide variety and a high amount of terpenes. So one example of a terpene is limonene, also found in citrus fruits. And we have some data that limonene can energize you. Linalool is found in lavender, also found in cannabis. And there's evidence that linalool can help with pain and anxiety. So now when you start talking about the effects of cannabis, is it THC? Is it CBD? Is it the terpenes? The story gets complicated very quickly because you're talking about a complex plant, not a single pure pharmaceutical drug. All right, so now let's talk about what we definitively understand about the health benefits of things like CBD, but also I can compare it to things like THC. And so for these next slides, I'm only going to be talking about human-controlled clinical trials. This is not anecdotal. These are not animal studies. These are rigorous studies where you can kind of, conclude that there is truth. So starting with lots of data, there's lots of human clinical trial data that THC can help with nausea, can help with anorexia, which is a condition where you're losing too much weight, and it can help with pain. And that's about it. We have a little bit of data, not a lot, but a little bit of human data that THC can also help with post-traumatic stress disorder, things that veterans, for example, might suffer from, Tourette's syndrome, certain types of sleep conditions, and that's about it. We have basically no human data on things like anxiety, depression, Alzheimer's, cancer, you name it, all the things that you might hear about online or hear people talk about, we have no human data on that. So for now, it's all anecdotal. Yeah, maybe there's some animal studies, but we're not animals. At least last time I checked, I'm not a mouse. So it's really the human data. Yeah, it's the human data that we want to rely on. All right, now let's contrast that with CBD. What do we know about CBD from, again, human, well-designed clinical trials? We have lots of data that CBD can be helpful for epilepsy. And that's pretty much it. Again, CBD research is a lot newer than THC research, so there's a lot that we just don't know. We have a little bit of data that CBD can help with addiction. Interestingly, CBD can actually, looks like it might be able to reduce cravings for certain addictive drugs. It might be able to help people with schizophrenia, make them less psychotic. It might be able to help with anxiety. and it might be able to help with certain types of sleep disturbances. And that's about it. We have no human data on things like pain, which is one of the most common reasons tens of millions of Americans are buying CBD. We don't have data on depression or cancer or autoimmune disorders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You name it. Anecdotal, yeah, maybe there's some animal studies, but not something you can hang your hat on.
So that's what I was going to ask. So where do all these claims come from? Because everybody tells me CBD can do everything from cure pain, cure cancer, right? You hear so much of that. Where is it coming from if there's no human data? Is it just anecdotal?
Yeah, so it's probably one of two big buckets. One is animal data, and then people take these serious academic papers done on mice, and they just pull the headline, which is like, and like, yes, there is data that CBD can do some pretty miraculous things in animals. It's never been attempted in humans. So that's one bucket. And then the other bucket is anecdotal data. A neighbor says, hey, this helped me with blank, and then the telephone game gets played, and you hear about it. And not to say that anecdotal data should be ignored, it should just be taken with a huge grain of salt.
Yeah.
Because of something called the placebo effect, which is if you take something believing that it'll help you, for some percentage of people, you'll get some benefit. So, just take all the anecdotal data you hear. Some of it's probably true. We just need to prove it out in a human study. But some of it's also probably placebo. So just take everything with some healthy skepticism is what I always say.
Got it.
All right. Now, we did talk about animal data. So let's talk about what do we know from studies on animals. Yes, THC and CBD appear to be antioxidants. They appear to have anti-inflammatory properties. They appear to have anti-cancer properties. Certain types of cancers and tumors, if you apply THC and CBD, it'll slow the growth, might even actively shrink some of these tumors. And yes, THC and CBD serve as neuroprotectants. There's some data in animals only, that if you take mice and you were to create injuries to their brain or to see over time as their brain deteriorates in the presence of cannabinoids, the brain has more protection, is healthier. Again, only in animals. Do not know if this will work in humans, but this might explain why you might hear some pretty miraculous things talked about, online and in conversation.
Yeah, I could see that. You see the animals, we all read headlines, right? We all read the headline, but that's amazing that it does all these things in animals. I have to believe eventually we'll do human trials on that as well, right?
Correct. Yeah, they might still be several years away. But also keep in mind, lots of things look good in animals, and then you go into humans, and it doesn't work.
Right.
There are countless drugs for instance, dementia that looked really good in animals. Then they went to human trials, and like, oh, it doesn't work. And that's because we're not mice. So, all right, let's talk about the health risks. And again, I'll contrast the health risks of THC with the health risks of CBD. There's a lot more health risks for THC. So number one, schizophrenia. So it looks like people who have a genetic risk for schizophrenia, if they use THC very heavily, especially early in their adolescence, they can increase the odds that they develop schizophrenia. So that's something to be careful of. So usually I say anybody with a family history of schizophrenia, psychotic disorder, anything like that, probably should stay away from cannabis. You might have a genetic risk for schizophrenia. Pregnancy, pregnant women shouldn't be using cannabis. There's deleterious effects on the infant or on the fetus, just like they shouldn't be using tobacco, alcohol, other drugs. The adolescence, the brain develops until your mid to early 20s, and the developing brain shouldn't be using cannabis, alcohol, tobacco, other drugs, etc. So we have some data to suggest that THC is not good for the adolescent brain. THC can be addictive. Again, it doesn't appear to be as addictive as, say, cigarettes or alcohol or other drugs, but it can still be addictive. And that's something that people should be aware of. I think there's this common myth that you can't get addicted or dependent on THC. That's not true. It's just not as common as alcohol, tobacco, addictions to other substances. And lastly, driving. Again, if you're intoxicated on THC and driving, you have a higher increased risk of crash. It doesn't appear to be as severe as drunk driving, but it's still worse than if you were sober. So we got to be very careful as more and more states are legalizing THC about this issue. Now, interestingly, we find data that people who smoke cannabis, light fire, smoke cannabis, smoke THC for decades on end, they don't have an increased risk of lung cancer. They don't even seem to have an increased risk of serious lung diseases like emphysema or COPD, which cigarette smokers definitely get. We're not sure why. It's a different plant. When you combust it, maybe it's creating different compounds. And you can't overdose from THC. So there haven't really been any recorded overdoses. Again, unlike things like, you can overdose and die from Tylenol. You can overdose and die from alcohol. Yeah. So again, there's some serious risks here to be aware of. But when we go to CBD, you'll see that there's not nearly as many serious risks to talk about. So probably the top health risk for CBD that everyone should be aware of, especially seniors, is the possibility of drug interactions. So maybe CBD isn't directly causing you harm, but CBD can slow down how your body breaks down other medications. So if your body is slower at breaking down other medications, those medications in your blood might rise and you might get a side effect from higher levels of those medications. And so as a common rule of thumb is if your medication has a grapefruit warning on it, those are the ones to be very careful about, because grapefruit and CBD interact similarly with similar medications.
Oh, wow.
And also in general, just always talk to your doctor before you CBD, before you do anything. Make sure they can also help check all of your meds, and also that they think it's a good idea that you should be trying CBD for something. There's an unknown risk of CBD on pregnancy. Again, it's a very new compound people are using. So I say for now, till we know more, stay away from it if you're pregnant or expecting to become pregnant soon, or even breastfeeding. Because some of this stuff can pass from the mother's milk into the fetus, into the newborn, and we're not sure yet. We need more data. And long-term use, we're still not, again, because it's so new, we're still not exactly sure what long-term consequences there might be. One thing that seems that there's some early evidence on is in people who already have maybe some liver disease, that maybe CBD can exacerbate the dysfunction of their liver. So if you already have some liver disease, or let's say if you're a heavy alcohol user, probably stay away from CBD. And again, always talk to your doctor to make sure your other medical conditions are contraindicated. Contraindicated means you shouldn't be combining.
You shouldn't mix them. Yeah. Quick question too, because every gas station sells CBD, right? You can't walk into a convenience store and get how do you know where to buy it? How do you know what you're even getting? Everyone seems to be selling it everywhere now. Exactly. How do you know the right stuff to buy even?
That's such a great question. So yeah, so there's some, it gets really interesting in terms of how can you legally buy it? And then I'll give you some tips for where to buy it, what to look for, etc. So briefly speaking on the regulations, at the state level, cannabis, THC, effectively is illegal at the federal level. All right, everyone should be aware of that. It is legal in 37 states. Okay, that's THC. And if you live in those states, you could legally purchase it, et cetera, and the federal government has effectively said that if states decide to do something with THC, we're not going to intervene. Now, when it comes to CBD, that is actually legal at the federal level. And that's because about 3 years ago, the federal government legalized hemp and everything that comes from hemp. And hemp was basically legally defined as cannabis that has very little to no THC. So that's why you can order CBD online. You can, walk into most stores and buy it now. It's because it's legal at the federal level because it's derived from hemp. Now, there's also pharmaceutical versions of THC and CBD, surprisingly, FDA approved. So Epidiolex is pure pharmaceutical CBD. It's only approved for epilepsy. And so otherwise it costs you $40,000 and your insurance isn't going to reimburse for it. So I doubt most people on this call are interested in that as an option. And then on the upper right-hand corner, Marinol is actually pure synthetic THC, which has been FDA approved and federally legal since the 1980s. for people who have nausea, for people who have anorexia and are losing weight. Now, certain anecdotal criticisms are that pure THC and pure CBD don't work as well as a hemp or cannabis extract that has all the other cannabinoids. There's over 100 cannabinoids, as well as all of those terpenes that I talked about. But again, it's all anecdotal. We don't actually know if it's better or worse than the pharmaceutical versions.
In the pharmaceutical version for anorexia, that's what a lot of cancer patients are using, right?
Exactly. Lots of cancer patients. And actually, back in the 80s and 90s, during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, a lot of people were using Marinol, also getting cannabis from the illicit market because it was helping them with their appetite, and also helping with like pain and discomfort as well. All right, so now for some practical tips. Again, if you want to go about, now I'm really just going to focus on CBD, where to buy it, what to do, how to talk to your doctor about it, all these things. So the first thing to realize is it comes in a variety of formats, right? So you could technically buy hemp shipped to your door that has lots of CBD in it and basically no THC. But that's not really a good way to use it. You probably don't want to smoke that. You know, it's going to irritate your lungs, et cetera, et cetera. Instead, what happens is companies are now taking those cannabinoids and terpenes out of the plant and creating concentrates and oils. And those concentrates and oils can be put into a variety of products. For example, you can put them in pills and capsules for people to swallow. That's kind of what the oils and concentrates look like after you pull them, separate them from the plant material. And again, those oils you can put into e-cigarettes, which again, probably aren't the best from a health perspective. Again, whenever you're smoking things in your lungs, it's probably not great. And for many of you, it's probably very irritating. So I wouldn't recommend that. But there's also, edibles, cookies, gummy bears, very popular ways that people are using CBD. Tinctures, so that comes in these kind of liquid containers. And then as well as topicals. So, the capsules, the edibles, and the tinctures allow you to not have to, inhale something. So those are some of the pros of those methods. The topicals would allow you to maybe target a skin condition or maybe like a superficial muscle issue without the CBD getting into your bloodstream. So if you want CBD in your bloodstream, the creams aren't going to do it. Similarly, if you have a skin issue, you might not want to ingest a bunch of CBD to just treat one area of a skin condition. So all these products have different pros and cons.
But the direct application to your skin, like that, it does work. The CBD does work there. I mean, we're going back to your slide where it's like, this isn't proven.
Yep, it's not. So there have been effectively virtually no studies on CBD in topical form in humans. So we're not exactly sure how much of the anecdotal data we hear is placebo versus people actually getting benefit. So I will say that in my personal opinion, depending on how those topical products are formulated, they may or may not work because depending on how you formulate them, they may or may not penetrate the skin very well. And so if you're trying to get to an achy joint or an achy muscle and it's not penetrating the skin, you're not going to get relief. So it really depends on the formulation as well to be able to deliver the cannabinoids below the skin. But if you're using it for a skin condition, you don't have to worry about getting below the skin. If you have inflammation, itchiness, redness, something like that. Another thing to recognize is that when you ingest cannabinoids by mouth, whether THC or CBD, the peak effect might not be for several hours. And so just be aware to avoid this common trap of you take some, you don't feel anything, and you take some more, and then suddenly you feel like you might have taken too much. So I'll talk more about later why there's a common saying of starting low and going very slow. Okay, where can you buy this?
Yeah, where to buy it? Where's the right place?
Very good question. So there's a couple places you can buy it, right? So you could walk into a state-sanctioned cannabis THC dispensary and they will sell CBD products. Some of the CBD products they sell have THC in them, but they'll also sell CBD products that have virtually no THC. And I'll talk about one reason why you might want to actually go to a dispensary, but let me talk about some of your other options. You could clearly just walk into any non-cannabis store. You're right. Gas stations are selling CBD. Grocery stores are selling CBD. You can buy, kiosks at malls are selling.
At the airport.
Or everywhere, right? You could purchase them there too, and there's pros and cons. And then lastly, you can buy them online from, again, myriad of websites. Now, here's the thing to note. The cannabis dispensaries are heavily regulated by the state. Anyone that wants to produce these products needs a license. Anyone that wants to sell these products needs a license. All these products go through mandatory testing, labeling, standards, all these things. Whereas in the non-cannabis stores and online, there's no regulation whatsoever. The FDA hasn't really been regulating CBD. So if you were to ask me, how do I 100% guarantee that the product I'm buying does contain the CBD it says it does and doesn't contain lots of harmful things? I would say, well, the only way to really know that is you go to a cannabis dispensary and buy a CBD product that doesn't have THC in it, made from low THC cannabis, and know that that product is regulated by the state, the store is regulated by the state, heavily scrutinized, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, they're the experts. I love that because, they've had training. They understand this space in a way the guy at the gas station doesn't when he says, this is the right one, right? These guys actually have training and experience, and because it's regulated, right, they know a lot more about that. So that makes sense.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And the only downside theoretically is, if you don't live anywhere near a cannabis dispensary or your state hasn't legalized it yet. Also, it's probably going to be more expensive in the dispensary because of the extra taxes the states have put on cannabis. And lastly, you might not be able to find a CBD product in a cannabis dispensary that has really, really, really low THC. You got to be super careful that the product you're buying, yes, it has CBD, but be careful that it doesn't also have a lot of THC. Because again, these products are made from cannabis. What about what to buy, brands to choose? I think the last poll, there's over 1,000 CBD brands, and a lot of them are not particularly reputable. So I would say if you're choosing a brand, there's only a few things you can really do. Unfortunately, there's not good tools to figure out who's good or who's bad. But one thing I've realized is go to the brand's website, and if they're very transparent about who their team is, you literally can see their names, their faces of the team, their backgrounds. These are real people. You Google them, you can pull up their LinkedIn of the CEO, all these things, probably a more reliable indicator that it's not just a fly-by-night operation that's just trying to scam you and make money, right? And the importance of this is that you want a product that actually has CBD in it. You want a product that doesn't have any contaminants, right? It's not regulated. So it's two reasons why you want to be super careful. Also, look around on the label, the bottle, or the website. Make sure it's U.S. grown. Hemp grown outside the U.S. is also legal to sell in America, but at least if it's U.S. grown hemp, there's some additional regulation, namely that the U.S. Department of Agriculture will license the hemp farms that are making the CBD. So a little more quality control. And the third thing is make sure there's third-party testing and make sure that the brand, the reputable brands generally will have all the results of their tests on their website. Again, yeah, they could theoretically forge it, but it's still better than nothing that they say, hey, if you look at the product, you'll see a lot number, a batch number, and usually can go to the brand's website and they'll have all the different batch numbers and lot numbers. And that testing report generally would look something like this. Shows you the date that it was tested, the company that submitted it for testing, and the amount of CBD in it, and whether or not there were other things like bacteria or residual solvents or pesticides. And again, it's not all brands do this, and put it on their website, but if you find that, it's a better indicator than nothing, right?
Right, that's great.
All right. How do you dose? Well, I'm not going to actually give like firm dosage numbers. First thing I'll say is, always talk to your doctor about how you should go about this. So before you start CBD, talk to your doctor, make sure there's no meds that it might interact with, make sure your doctor thinks it's a good idea. And your doctor might have dosing recommendations, but from my experience, they also don't know because it wasn't taught in med school and it's so new. But I will say in general, start at a dose that's low and increase slowly over time. And you always want to look out for side effects. Again, there's not really, unlike THC, the health risks are much lower, but some people anecdotally have reported side effects of maybe having some diarrhea or being a little tired from using CBD. So, start at a low dosage and slowly increase the dosage over time till you get the benefit you want, or you start to notice a side effect that you don't want. That's when maybe I should stop the dosage or maybe go down a little bit. One thing I will say, all the clinical trials of CBD ever done, remember for addiction, schizophrenia, anxiety, epilepsy, those have used hundreds of milligrams a day. That's a lot. Whereas if you look at the polls of average Americans, they're probably using several tens of milligrams a day on average. So the big discrepancy between the doses being studied in the clinical trials and the much smaller doses that consumers are generally using. You also might want to take it with food. CBD absorbs up to 4 to 5 times more when you take it with food than on an empty stomach. And lastly, like I mentioned earlier, always be on the lookout for, am I getting the benefit I want, or is there a side effect I don't want? Taking any medication, whether it's a supplement or a prescription, it's all about risk and benefit, right? If the risk is low and the benefit is low, okay, maybe that's a good trade-off. If the risk is really high and the benefit's really low, that's not a very good trade-off. The best is where the risk is low, but the benefit's high, right? Low side effects, high benefit. That's the best trade-off to make. All right, so to recap, we talked about cannabis, long history with humans. There's 2 main cannabinoids in cannabis, but there are over 100 different cannabinoids. But there's really only 2 right now that we know much about, CBD and THC. They are not remotely the same thing at all. Mm-hmm. Talked about some of the potential benefits of cannabinoids. We mentioned that for instance, it looks like for THC, some of the benefits included pain, whereas for CBD, some of the benefits included anxiety and helping with sleep. We talked about the risks of CBD, namely interacting with other drugs that you might be taking. Again, if your drug has a grapefruit warning, that's where you really want to be careful because grapefruit and CBD will do similar things to your medications. We also talked about if you have any issues with your liver, probably stay away from CBD. And again, most of all, talk to your doctor about what to do about CBD. We talked about the different regulations, right? THC is legal in 37 states, CBD is legal everywhere, if you get it from hemp. And last thing, we talked about some tips, right? Number 1, beware of the products you buy. It's up to you. There's not a lot of regulation, so it's really up to you to be careful about the brands you choose and the products you buy. And in terms of dosing, whatever you do, increase it slowly and be looking for benefits versus side effects to know when is it time to maybe stop increasing the dosage.
Yeah.
And so with that, we can,
that's great. We have so many questions coming in, Jeff. This is amazing. If you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or type it in the comments on Facebook. And we're going to get to Q&A right now. So keep them coming. We have so many. This is awesome. This is a great one. I saw this come in and I love this question. When you think about where to buy it, Doug and Evie are asking, what about buying CBD at like a chain vitamin shop?
Great question. So I should have talked about that. If you were to buy the CBD from a reputable retailer, like a large retail store, well, first off, keep in mind that like the really big retail stores, Ralph's, Walmart, Rite Aid, CVS, they're only selling topical CBD. They don't sell ingestible CBD yet. They just haven't felt comfortable doing that yet. So in general, when you buy things at large retailers, yes, it goes through some vetting process. They're not like doing random testing of the products, but any company that goes knock, knock, hey, Walmart, I want to sell product in your store. Walmart goes like, who are you? Where do you make your product? How do you test it? So there's some diligence that they go through. So if you have no other options aside from buying CBD at a gas station and buying CBD at a franchise store that's reputable, the reputable store has probably vetted the products they carry more so than some random one-off little gas station or boat.
Right. Yeah, I would totally trust a vitamin shop. Like that's where I get all my like herbal medicines. It's like, yes, I would totally trust a vitamin shop versus the guy at the Shell gas station.
Exactly. Yeah. And but again, it's also like the larger the store is, the more it's a chain, the more it's a franchise. Mm-hmm. Like if it's a store that has 1,000 locations, they probably have a very standardized process vetting the products they carry. So at least it's gone through some of their
right.
So,
okay, here's a great pet question. I knew we'd have pet questions. Is CBD safe for pets, and can it help reduce anxiety in pets?
It's a great question. A lot of people are using these products on their pets. Safety-wise, there's actually been several studies, namely in dogs. Well, first off, there's all the studies that have been done on like mice and stuff, but there's also been studies on like dogs to specifically understand if pets can use this. It appears that it's pretty safe. It hasn't been studied for anxiety or stress, although anecdotally, that's one of the most top reasons people are giving it to their pets. What it has been studied for in pets, dogs specifically, is like joint pain and discomfort, like osteoarthritis in dogs. But anecdotally, I hear all the time that it helps people's pets like calm down. Mm-hmm. I really swear by it. So who knows? It's could still be placebo, but in this case, it's not the placebo of the dog.
The dog doesn't know. The dog doesn't know you're trying to trick him.
The only placebo could be like the owner being
Oh, he seems more calm.
Fido's chill. It must be the CBD. But again, talking to some of these dog owners, I believe them. I believe them when they talk about their pet being much more calm, separation anxiety when they're gone, not like being stressed out if there's like a big thunderstorm outside or something. So who knows?
All right, here's another great question. Will I test positive for THC if I'm taking CBD?
It's a great question. So theoretically, if the product you're buying has basically no THC, you're almost certainly not going to test positive for THC. I think where the issue lies is some of these CBD products have a little bit of THC in them. And if you take tons and tons and tons of it, you might build up enough THC in your system to trigger a drug test. So what I would say is if you're in a situation where testing positive for THC could be really disastrous, you might lose your job, you might lose benefits, whatever. Even hemp-derived CBD, you might want to just not do it. Again, it's a small, but there's a theoretical chance that it's a legal CBD product made from hemp, but it has a little bit of legal THC. And if you drink a bunch of it, maybe you might trigger that drug test. So it's really something to be cautious of.
Keep an eye on. Yeah. We have a question coming in from Facebook. Some seniors deal with psychosis and dementia and stuff like that already. Does CBD make that worse?
So again, it hasn't been studied one way or another, but based on everything I come to know about CBD, I don't think it will. In contrast, like CBD, we know CBD is non-intoxicating. The one thing that CBD, it wouldn't make the dementia, the psychosis worse, but CBD, one of the side effects that some people report is that it can make them a little sedated or tired. And so if you have someone who's already demented and they're already not awake, maybe the CBD might sedate them even more. which might be undesirable. But in terms of worsening the psychosis, worsening dementia, I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that.
Someone else is asking, when I take CBD for the first time, what should I look out for that might be a red flag? Because I have a lot of allergies.
It's a good question. Well, if you have an allergy to any substance, some of the tall tale signs to look for, there's some mild allergic reactions, which is like itchiness, things like that. The more severe allergic reactions people get when you're really in something called anaphylaxis is when you have difficulty breathing, your face really starts to swell, things like that. So if what you have is an allergy in that sense, I would say the most life-threatening thing to start keeping an eye out for is like breathing difficulties. And then more kind of lower grade allergic responses, itchiness, redness, things like that. But I haven't heard about too many allergic reactions people are having to CBD.
Okay. And Peggy's asking if there's any research on CBD and high blood pressure.
Interesting. There have not been any huge, long story short, we really don't know. There's some really limited evidence to suggest that CBD might be able to lower blood pressure a little bit, but it shouldn't replace your medications for blood pressure.
Yeah.
Not until we have much more research on it.
And I think that goes back to always talk to your doctor anyway, right?
Right.
I mean, you're adding anything to you should ask your doctor.
Exactly.
So here's a great question. What is the difference between the broad spectrum and the full spectrum CBD? This is someone who knows what's going on, because I'm like, we didn't even touch on that.
Brass that is sharp. All right, so full spectrum is a term that was kind of developed in the cannabis industry to refer to a product that contains the full spectrum of all the things in the cannabis or hemp plant, all the cannabinoids, all the terpenes, et cetera, et cetera. And then broad spectrum is referring to a full spectrum product where all the THC has been filtered out. So there's still a broad spectrum, but it's missing that last little bit of the full spectrum. Okay, so theoretically or anecdotally, people say, oh, well, full spectrum, because it's got that little bit of THC in it, it's able to give you some of the health benefits of THC without the risks, and therefore it works better than broad spectrum. But that's all just conjecture and hypothesis. There's been no evidence to suggest that it's better or worse. We just don't know. So yeah, people talk about full spectrum, it means there's some THC in there. Broad spectrum usually means they've filtered out the THC, there's zero THC in the product.
That's great. James has a question. Is there a link or a place we can go for more information and information about human trials specifically?
Projectcbd.org has some resources there, spelled like it sounds. That might be the most kind of consumer-friendly place to look around. Some other good places like Healthline. Healthline is like the most visited health information websites. You can hop on Healthline and Google CBD, and you'll find tons and tons of articles of CBD for sleep. What's the evidence? CBD for pain, what's the evidence? And et cetera, et cetera.
That's great. Okay, is there a list out there that tells me what medications don't mix well with cannabis beyond the grapefruit? Is there any way I can get a list of that?
I can't think of any good standard lists off the top of my mind. If you were to Google cannabis and drug interactions, you'll come up with a list. I can't tell you how accurate those lists are. So you might just have to, unfortunately, you might have to talk to your doctor, see if they know.
So your pharmacist.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, how about this one? Which types of CBD have the best delivery into your body? Topicals, liquids, pills, edibles, vape, what's the best delivery?
Great question. So like we said, topicals aren't really getting into your bloodstream. When you smoke things, it gets into your bloodstream really fast. But again, you're irritating your lungs, and a lot of these e-cigarettes, we're still not exactly sure what their long-term health consequences are because they're so new. You might want to be messing with those vape oils and the e-cigarettes and all that. So I think that really leaves, tinctures, edibles, liquids, all of that. Mm-hmm. You swallow something, it's got to first go into your stomach, then to your intestine, gets absorbed by your intestine, your liver processes it, and then dumps it into your bloodstream. But when you put things under your tongue, for example, right, you can absorb some of it through the capillaries under your tongue, and that kind of goes straight to your bloodstream. Some people there are some CBD products out there that are like dissolvable tabs under your tongue, tablets, or tinctures that you hold under your tongue. Theoretically, those would absorb into your bloodstream faster and you might absorb more. And because unfortunately, CBD by itself on an empty stomach is not absorbed very well. That's why if you take it with food, you're getting, again, 4 to 5 times more absorption, especially with food that has some fat in it.
You know, to that end, Carol is asking if you could talk a little bit about the percentages in CBD topicals and edibles and related to their effectiveness.
Right. So unfortunately, that's a complete unknown right now. Like I mentioned, the only data that we can really definitively say is hundreds of milligrams of CBD a day can help with epilepsy, addiction, schizophrenia, anxiety, and maybe sleep. But what does 50 milligrams do? What does 20 do? We don't know. It's never been studied in a clinical trial. And those are the doses that are typical of per capsule, per gummy bear, per dropper full of a tincture. That's like the typical range, 10 to maybe 40, 50 milligrams per serving is what you'll see in these products you buy.
Yeah. Here's a great question. What is the difference between hemp and CBD? Can you cover that again?
Yeah. So hemp is a type of cannabis plant that is very, very, very low in THC. So cannabis is the official species of plant. And if there's very, very, very low THC, the law has defined that as hemp. And from hemp, you can make rope, you can make hemp seed, and you could also make CBD products out of hemp. So you could say that most of the products that I imagine listeners are going to be using are hemp-derived CBD products. You could also buy like marijuana, cannabis-derived CBD products, but you can only purchase those in cannabis marijuana stores in states where it's legal. And they might have more THC in them than a hemp product.
Right. John wants to know, what is the shelf life of CBD?
It's another good question. We're not sure exactly. And so I typically, when you buy these products, the manufacturers will put expiration dates on there. So the shelf life of CBD, it's not just dependent on the CBD itself, it's also dependent on what else is in there, right? So a lot of times they'll dissolve the CBD in like coconut oil, and that coconut oil is the shelf life, rancid. So the short answer is this shelf life of CBD in these different formulations and products, we're not exactly sure what the shelf life is, but just as importantly, those other contents have their own shelf life. The coconut oil, the things that's designed. So just always check the expiration date of these products.
You know, to your point about there being other things in there, someone is asking, you talked about contaminants. Oh, go ahead.
So CBD will degrade faster if exposed to direct sunlight. So if you, for some reason, are keeping your tincture bottle like in your kitchen window and there's hours of direct sunlight on it every day, it might degrade it faster than if you keep it away from direct sunlight, or even keep it in a fridge. Theoretically, it might store a little longer, but you don't need to refrigerate the stuff technically.
That's good to know. So you talked about contaminants. What are some of the contaminants that people need to look out for? Yeah.
So there's a couple categories. So first, there's things called residual solvents. And a solvent is a type of chemical they use when they're pulling the cannabinoids away from the plant material. Remember I said you pull them out, turn them into this oil, then this I can mix into a bunch of different products. Sometimes the solvents that I use aren't fully cleaned out from the final product. So there's residual solvents. There can be pesticides that were in the plant material that kind of got carried with the cannabinoids into the final product. And then there's microbial contaminants, bacteria, mold, things like that, that could be growing if it was manufactured in a place that wasn't sterilized.
Got it. So you were talking about dispensaries, and someone is asking if dispensaries can sell online, and can they deliver CBD only products to them if it's not in their state?
No. So the way that the marijuana cannabis THC system is, States have legalized it, but those products can only remain in that state, and only residents physically in that state can purchase it. So unfortunately, those companies can't deliver to anyone outside of the state.
Got it.
But if you're in the state, most states have some form of like direct to your doorstep delivery for people who might find it hard to go to a dispensary.
Okay. Any other questions you want to get in? Everyone get them in. I think we've covered just about everything. Here's one. Is CBD safe for those with lifelong brain injury or someone that has a history of bleeding in the brain or has a heart attack or heart disease? Like, that's probably going to go back to the, we don't know. I think you're going to go back to, we don't know. We haven't researched it.
I haven't researched that. At least there's no data I can think of that it's harmful for those conditions, but there's also no data I can think of where it's been explicitly safe for those conditions.
Got it. Okay, let's see. Any more questions? If the CBD does have THC in it, can you get high from it?
Good, depending on how much THC is in there. And for a frame of reference, I mentioned official studies on CBD have used hundreds of milligrams a day. The products that you're buying probably have anywhere from 5 to 50 milligrams per serving of CBD. When it comes to THC, the intoxicating effects of THC kick in at much lower milligrams of THC. Some people, 5 milligrams of THC is very intoxicating. Whereas CBD, you could take 50 milligrams, you won't feel any intoxication. So if you buy a product that has a little bit of THC and a lot of CBD, you could still get intoxicated if the amount of THC total you're ingesting starts to get to the 3, 4, 5 milligram range. You can start to get pretty intoxicated. Got
it. And one person is asking, how do we know there's no THC in with the CBD? How do we even know that?
That's where, the products you're buying online most likely don't have much THC at all because it's made from hemp, right? Anything you're buying in stores and online from hemp probably has very little THC. Things you buy in a dispensary, you always got to triple check because those legally could have much more THC. The CBD products from hemp by law cannot have very much THC at all. So a lot of it's just checking the label to make sure that there's not THC. And then yes, I guess there's a theoretical chance that the label could be wrong, which it goes back to buyer beware. Just know who is the brand and who is the store selling it.
That's great. Thank you so much, everybody, for your questions. Jeff, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe we could put the slide back up with Jeff's contact info for folks who want to follow him. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and thanks for asking all your questions. Again, we're going to email you a recording and a transcript of this webinar so you could see it again, you could share with your family and friends, and we hope that you will also join us for our next webinar on Wednesday, August 18th at 3 p.m. And the subject is going to be best pets for older adults. Join us for a conversation with Dr. Marty Becker, who is a DVM, about the breeds and types of animals that are the best pets and the best fit for senior lifestyles. We'll talk about common pet health issues to consider when choosing a new friend and more. You can register for all that at brookdale.com in the know. And our webinars feature a different subject every month. So you can also go to brookdale.com in the know to learn more and see past episodes. We hope to see you guys again soon. Thank you again so much, Dr. Chen. And until next time, we hope you all stay safe, happy, and well. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.